I decided to see Madam Web to see if it was as bad as everyone was saying it was. I am a big Marvel fan. Growing up, I was more of a fan of Wolverine, but Spidey was a very close second. And I was a fan of Madam Web from the Spider-Man animated series. And when I heard that Madam Web was going to be a film, a clairvoyant superhero to me sounds pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty much just Batman prep time. And when I heard Dakota Johnson is playing Madam Web, well, I remembered her from another film and thought, yeah, I guess I can see that. Now, I didn't see the movie when it first came out. A lot of people were saying the movie was just trash. But then it went from people saying it was a bad movie to it being a terrible movie to it getting to this real angry fun. And it was this angry fun which got me so curious to see the film. This is David from the editing room, just adding a few notes. First of all, from this point on, spoilers. There was some stuff I liked about the film, like as I mentioned, the clairvoyant superhero. I thought there was a lot of potential there. There was a great scene where the girls get attacked by the main villain, Ezekiel, and she ultimately fails to protect them, but then suddenly we go back a scene, and she's standing by the taxi she's stolen, and then does the whole fight again, but this time just hits him with her car. And I actually quite liked that. I also like seeing Uncle Ben in a movie where he doesn't die. And I think the actor who played him, he did a good job. I also liked that they introduced the spider totems and the concept of mini spider people. You could tell Sony were not allowed to say Aunt May and Peter Parker.
Kinda met someone.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
What's this one's name?
I honestly thought he forgot her name, but then later I saw this.
Cassie, what's your guess?
Ben?
The name is...
So yeah, it's quite obvious they're not allowed to use those names. Why couldn't they just not name the baby? You could have just seen Mary pregnant. But still, I did find it funny. In fact, I think it would be even funnier if they just did the movie with them saying the names and then later censored it.
Cassie, what's your guess?
What's this one's name?
There's also a great line at the end where one of the girls mentions to Cassie, Ben's now an uncle. He's going to have all the fun of being a parent without all the responsibility. To which Cassie goes,
That's what he thinks.
and I thought, what a she can see the future, she knows Peter Parker's parents are gonna die, and she's gonna do nothing about it. Now, I did have a bit of a chuckle over that. So that was some of the stuff I did like. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the stuff I didn't like because I think it'll be the same in every review. But just real quick, yes, Dakota Johnson's acting was very wooden. Now, there were some scenes where she was acting, there were some scenes where you could tell that she was trying to act, but there was kind of this boiling resentment behind what she was doing. And then she just kind of sleptwalked through the rest of it. Also, Sydney Sweeney, she refused to act in this. It's like every scene was the very first take, and it was also the very first day she came onto that set. She didn't really know what her character was, nor did she seem to care. Maybe did she just forget what her character was in every scene? Also, the main villain Ezekiel, he really had no character to build on. He had one line about how his family was never helped by the spider totems, and his main motivation of the film was to kill the three girls who in future will kill him. Yet he doesn't think of maybe killing the spider that would grant them their powers, or just moving country. It just didn't make any sense. I couldn't figure out the purpose of this film. If it was meant to be setting up Madam Web, there was too much focus on the Spider Women. And if it was meant to set up the Spider Women, there wasn't enough focus on the Spider Women. It reminded me a lot of the Joker in the first Suicide Squad movie. Either you tease the character, or you establish the character. If the three women were meant to become the Spider Women later in another film, we should have never seen them in the costumes. Or if they were meant to establish the Spider Women, they should have been in the costumes from the midpoint on. So what was the purpose of this film? That I couldn't figure out. And I decided I'd watch it a second time. And when watching the movie the second time, I felt really sorry for the actors and the director. I honestly think there's a bigger story about the production. Something happened behind the scenes. Because I think the director was hamstrung by Sony. I'd be curious seeing the movie again, but shown in the order they shot it. Maybe at first, some of the actors actually cared. They had an idea of what was going on, and then something happened, and the movie just kept changing direction. Maybe the audience wasn't just a victim. The actors and the director were victims as well. Now, me being an arrogant guy on the internet, I think I could have come up with a better film. Now, I do have some rules. It has to be a feasible Sony Marvel movie. I can't just chuck in any other characters that I like. Even though I am going to change the main villain. But I think they could use that villain. It has to be loosely based on the current Sony movie. I don't want it to go way too off in a different direction. I also want to pay tribute to the best comic that Matterweb was in, and that is Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. It's a great comic about how Spider-Man, even though he's one of the greatest superheroes, sometimes things are inevitable. I also am going to pay tribute to the comic where the main villain that I'm using is in, and that is The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, issues 30 to 36. David from the editing room again. I do want to ask, if you do like this content, please like and subscribe to my channel. I do want to one day be a full-time YouTuber. Back to the video. Now, like the Sony movie, we are going to start in the Peruvian jungle, though this time in the late 1960s. That's because I want to line it up a little bit better with the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. And we start with Constance, Cassie's mother. Constance is an archaeologist, and she's looking into this elusive spider cult. She knows that every 30 years an event takes place, which gives the members of the cult otherworldly powers. She goes to the house of Ezekiel, a fellow archaeologist, who in my version will be played by the guy who played Santiago. And Ezekiel goes into the myth about the spider cult with Constance. He also tells her that this event could also just summon a destroyer. But after talking a little bit about the spider cult, Ezekiel basically says, it's a myth, let it go. Now, before she leaves, Cassie starts to cry. She's just a baby in a basket, and she asks Ezekiel if she can go to the other room and change Cassie. She comes across Ezekiel's scrapbook, and in that scrapbook it reveals that Ezekiel is a member of the cult, and Ezekiel's been lying to her the entire time. Now, she keeps this to herself. She leaves Ezekiel's house, but then stays out the front. She's gonna follow him. When night falls, she follows Ezekiel into the Peruvian jungle. That's where he meets up with 7 other cult members, one of them being a lady called Amara. They go to a place in the jungle where there's a big carving of a spider in the center and 4 pillars set up around it. They sit together, holding hands, and they start doing a guided meditation. Constance is in the distance, taking photos, leaving baby Cassie in her car. As the guided meditation is taking place, the spider in the center starts to glow, and suddenly 8 webs shoot out from that spider, hitting every member except for Amara. The web going in her direction goes past her and instead hits baby Cassie in the car. A quick side note, there are going to be no spider bites in my movie. That is because I want those spider bites to be exclusive to Peter and Miles. Also, there are other ways to get spider powers in the Marvel Universe without those spider bites. That's when a portal opens up from the spider carving, and Morlan arrives, played by the guy who played Ezekiel. He starts killing the members of the cult. A few fight back, but Morlan easily absorbs their powers, killing them, and Amara and Ezekiel run away. Then he turns his eyes to Constance, off in the distance taking photos, and starts running towards her. Constance quickly runs to her car and tries to take off when Morlan comes up from behind and grabs the car and just holds it in place. So Constance gets out of the car with Cassie. She makes a run for it, but very quickly Morlan catches up to her. So she puts Cassie down and tries to fight back. even scratching Morlan's eyes, making him smile. Then he backhands her, killing her. He then looks down at baby Cassie, and before touching her, he just kind of pauses and stares. That's when Ezekiel comes down from a tree with a branch and smashes it over Morlan's head, which actually has zero effect. But Ezekiel manages to grab Cassie and make a run for it. And Morlan just stands there, staring. We then cut to 30 years later, and Cassie is working in New York City as a radio psychic. She not only predicts the future, but also answers questions about the supernatural creatures, such as, is the wall crawler of the Bronx real? After she finishes at the radio station, she's on her way home when she walks past an Oscorp protest. People are saying that their new radioactive element is killing the environment. Then she walks past Central Park and she stops at a clearing where there's a spider mosaic on the ground. She takes a moment to meditate. She heads back to her apartment. In her apartment, there are photos of her as a teenager doing tarot card readings on the streets. There's also a framed degree in social studies. She's now a qualified social worker. Then there's a knock on the door and we're introduced to Ben. Ben is a social worker and also a former army officer, and he's been friends with Cassie since they were kids. Ben has some great news. He's just proposed to his girlfriend and they are now engaged, and he's going to move into her apartment. Cassie gives him a big hug, but then it's time to get to business, because Cassie has just recently finished her degree and she can now be a social worker as well, with Ben getting her a job and now being her superior. And Ben assigns her 3 troubled teenage girls. First we meet Julia, a girl who suffers from social anxiety and has troubles making connections to people. She's an affair baby, and her mother always blamed her for the divorce with her husband. Second we meet Anya, a girl with a lot of bravado who keeps getting into fights. Anya's parents were in prison, so she had to grow up with her grandmother. And thirdly, we meet Maddie, a girl with a big rap sheet for shoplifting. Maddie grew up in a very poor neighbourhood, and she was the oldest of 5 kids. Cassie struggles to make connections with these 3 girls, so she has another meeting with Ben, who suggests they do a group activity together. But Ben does have to cut the meeting short. He has to prepare for his new second job. His brother Richard Parker got him a job as a night security for one of the Oscorp labs. Cassie organises a walk with the 3 girls through Central Park. As they're going on this walk, 3 girls, they don't really get along. Anya and Maddie keep arguing, and Julia just goes quiet. They go to the clearing where there's the mosaic of the spider, and she asks the 3 girls to sit in a circle with her and hold hands. They're going to do a guided meditation. The girls do giggle at this, but they decide to play along anyway. And as they're sitting there in the circle holding hands, they all have the same dream. A dream of a spiderweb engulfing them, yet not entangling them, but freeing them. That's when they suddenly get an image of Morlan reaching out trying to grab them, and this shocks them so much they suddenly awaken and it's night time. As they leave, Cassie takes the path to the right, but suddenly gets a vision of men approaching them demanding their purses. So they go to take the path to the left, but then Cassie gets a vision of a newspaper article of a man being murdered in Central Park. She then gets another vision that the audience doesn't see. She opens her eyes in disbelief, but decides to take the right path. 6 men approach the women and demand their purses. Arnie tells them to piss off, and one goes to attack her. Then instinctively, a blue exoskeleton engulfs Anya, and the man's fist hits the skeleton and he screams in pain. Julia puts her hands up in her defense, and 2 telekinetic webs come out of her hands, engulfing 2 of the muggers, and that's when Maddie's 4 extra spider legs come out and uppercut the rest of them. Everyone flees the scene. This is when we cut to Ezekiel sitting in a bar by himself, drinking and smoking a cigar. He starts to cough violently. He looks down into his hand, seeing blood. Then when he looks up, he's suddenly no longer at the bar. Instead, he's back in the Peruvian jungle, where he was 30 years ago doing the ritual. Then he can see Cassie and the three girls. That's when he realizes that Morlan has returned. The ritual spot is now festival grounds, and Ezekiel watches through Morlan's eyes as he starts his walk, pushing people out of the way, walking over the top of people and destroying things. That's when he hears Amara's voice running up to Morlan saying, "Stop, stop, please stop, stop your walk." But Morlan is ignoring her. Then Amara says, "What if I bring the totems to you?" He then says that unfortunately this was the closest portal he has to get to the totems. But there is a potential portal in Central Park in New York City. And if she can open that portal for him, his walk will be a lot shorter. It'll also save him a couple of weeks. He might have eternity, but he doesn't want to waste time. Morlan gives Amara a day, but she manages to bargain it up to a week. Morlan agrees, sits down, Amara gives him a beer and he starts drinking. That's when she runs to message Ezekiel, but there's already a message on her pager saying, "I know." We cut back to Cassie and the girls in a diner trying to make sense of what the hell just happened. The next day they meet at an abandoned warehouse that Maddie knows. That's when they start exploring their new spider powers. Now the three girls, they have superhuman strength, superhuman agility, they can also climb on walls, but they also have their individual unique powers, such as Julia being able to cast telekinetic webs, Anya being able to cover herself in a blue exoskeleton, and Maddie having 4 extra spider legs coming out of her back. Cassie doesn't get those physical abilities, but she can now accurately see the future. She can also telepathically communicate with people, and she can astral project, even becoming a ghostly form. At the end of the day, Ezekiel arrives. The three girls go to confront him, but Cassie tells them to stand down. Ezekiel explains to them about the spider totems. Cassie asks if he knows anything about her mother because she was researching into them, but Ezekiel lies and says no. He then states that they must give themselves to Morlan, as that would stop his path of destruction. But the girls refuse and Ezekiel leaves. But Cassie tells them there is a future where they survive, yet she doesn't know exactly how yet. The 4 of them decide they must now stay together. So Cassie rings up Ben and asks if they can use his apartment since he's now staying with his fiancée. He reluctantly agrees and the 4 girls move into his apartment. And when they get to his apartment, they can see that there are drawings on the walls, left there by Ben's 6-year-old nephew. But Ben's nephew is drawing things like the periodic table. Over the next few days, we see the girls trying out their spider powers by stopping small crimes, rescuing people, and also redirecting those protests against Oscorp. All the while, Cassie is telepathically communicating to them. On the 7th day, Ben drops around to the apartment to see how everyone's going, but he can't stay long because his brother and sister-in-law are going to New Jersey. They're going to a conference for Oscorp, and it's up to him to look after his nephew, can't say the word Peter, for the next couple of days. After he leaves, Ezekiel comes in through the window. Remember, he's got some spider powers, and he pleads with the 4 of them to please come with him. Cassie says to him, "I know you're trying to save innocent people, but there is another way. I can see it, I just can't grasp it." Ezekiel sighs, he heads out of the apartment, and then he heads to Central Park, not knowing that Cassie is following him in the astro-projected form. He gets to the park, the sun is coming down, and he sets up 4 pillars around that spider mosaic. He sits there and starts to meditate as the spider glows. The portal opens, and Morlan steps through. And thanks Ezekiel. Because of him, the spider totem has made her way to her full potential. And in exchange, Morlan will come for him last. Amara steps up behind Morlan and then starts yelling at Ezekiel, "Where are the other totems? He's going to start his rampage." That's when Cassie steps in her astro-projected form and asks Morlan, why is he doing this? Morlan explains to her that the spider totems have the potential to destroy the entire multiverse, and it's up to him to rid the multiverse of them. And in exchange, he gets to keep their unique powers. He also says Cassie is the most unique he's come across, and that's why he's coming for her first. Ezekiel pleads with Cassie, bring the girls, meet Morlan, let's not have a rampage. But Cassie says to him, please have faith in us. Morlan starts his walk, and left with no choice, Ezekiel tries to attack Morlan. But his blows have no effect, and Morlan just ignores him, saying, I will get to you last as I promise. But as Morlan is mid-step, Ezekiel manages to sweep his other leg out from underneath him, and Morlan falls over and hits the ground. He gets up irritated, and that's when Ezekiel manages to grab him, swing him around and throw him backwards. Morlan gets angry and says, fine, you can be first. And that starts the fight between the wall crawler of the Bronx and Morlan. Ezekiel's curse is that he can see his death coming, and therefore can see through Morlan's eyes, and can see every attack Morlan is trying to land, and Ezekiel dodges. Then Ezekiel starts to cough. Blood comes up, and Morlan grabs him. As Morlan's draining away Ezekiel's life force, he also starts to cough quite violently, but Morlan recovers and kills Ezekiel. And this is where we get to the main action sequence of this movie. Morlan starts his walk through New York City, destroying anything that gets in his way. And the three Spider Girls are clearing the path for him, trying to get all the innocent people out of the way and rescue any that do. Cassie, meanwhile, is on a subway train going to one of the Oscorp labs. She's telepathically communicating with the girls, using her predictive powers to tell the girls where Morlan is going next and what to do. During the rampage, Cassie gets a vision of Morlan throwing a bollard in the air, which smashes into a helicopter, causing it to crash. Before she can alert the girls, she suddenly gets a vision of New York City in flames. When she snaps out of it, it's too late. The helicopter crashes, and Cassie knows exactly who is in that helicopter. A tear rolls from her eye, but she ignores it. She has to keep trying to help as many people as possible. Cassie then arrives at the Oscorp lab that Ben is working night shift at. Ben opens the gate, she walks in, and Cassie tries to explain the whole situation to Ben, which Ben is not quite getting. Some sort of universal being coming to kill her? Now, obviously thinking there must be something wrong with Cassie, Ben takes her inside the lab, sits her down, and goes to get her a coffee. That's when Cassie spots that radioactive element. It's behind protective glass, so she grabs a fire extinguisher, smashes the glass, and grabs the element. The alarms go off in the lab. Ben runs out to see Cassie standing there, holding the element, and he immediately starts reporting a radioactive leak. Now, as he tries to tell Cassie to put it down, that's when Morlan busts through one of the walls of the lab, and Ben is knocked out in the rubble. Off in the distance, Cassie can see the three Spider Girls rushing towards her, but telepathically she says to them, go back and help the people of the city. Reluctantly, they turn around, and Cassie faces Morlan on her own. Now, she takes that radioactive element and puts it in her mouth and swallows it. Morlan approaches her, but doesn't touch her straight away, and instead makes her an offer. Come through the multiverse with him. Be his companion. Help him track down these spider totems. They are a threat to the entire multiverse, and using your unique powers, they could be the ultimate team. Cassie starts to convulse, and then spits in Morlan's face. Morlan smiles, and tells her, you're just as tough as your mother. He puts his hand on her forehead, and starts to absorb her, when suddenly that element is now in him, and he starts to convulse. That's when Ben comes to. He looks up at Morlan, and Morlan turns and looks at him, utterly confused. He then shoots Morlan, and Morlan explodes into light. Cassie falls to the ground unconscious, and that's when men in hazmat suits come in and take Ben and Cassie away. We cut to the next day, and Cassie is in hospital. A nurse is telling her that she's now permanently blind, paralysed from the waist down, and has to spend the rest of her life on life support. But this is only chatter in the background. Jess projects into another room where Ben is lying there. Now he's looking out the window, and a nurse is telling him that he will make a full recovery, though they might want to check his fertility. But that's when Ben's wife and his nephew walk into the room. They look at each other, and all three of them start to cry. A tear goes down Cassie's face, and she promises Ben that she'll always look out for the boy. That's when the three girls enter the room. Now they are devastated to see the state that Cassie is in, but Cassie tells them to cheer up, this is just the beginning. And that's how I would have done the Madame Web film. It introduces the concept of the spider totems. It also shows the link between her and Peter, and it showcases the Spider Women so they can have their own movies to themselves. Well, but what do you think? Could have you written a better Madame Web film? Did mine have way too many plot holes? I could think of a few. But let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'm David Basson. Thank you for watching.